The town of Harlan's Bluff, Colorado, held its annual church auction on the last Saturday of October. It was not called a charity auction. It was called a harvest giving, which was the kind of name that made an uncomfortable arrangement sound like something from a hymnal. The Methodist congregation collected goods, preserves, quilts, furniture, livestock, and sold them to raise funds for the county orphan home 12 miles east. Everyone gave what they could spare. The auctioneer, a ruddy man named Tuck, who ran the feed store on Main Street, moved through the items quickly, and by noon most of the useful things were gone. What nobody talked about, but everybody understood, was that the orphan home also sent children. Not to be sold. That was not the word anyone used. The arrangement was called a placement, and the children stood near the side of the church in clean clothes that didn't quite fit, and families who were interested could speak to the matron, a woman named Mrs. Grover, who wore the expression of someone doing difficult work with insufficient resources and no expectation of thanks. If a family decided to take a child, there was paperwork and a small administrative fee that covered the home's costs. It was 1883, and November was coming, and nobody had room for sentiment about how things were named. Nora Vane was standing at the back of the crowd with no intention of being there at all. She was 31 years old, which in Harlan's Bluff in 1883 was the age at which a woman without a husband or children became a particular kind of invisible. Not unkindly invisible, people greeted her by name, bought her bread at the bakery she ran from the front room of her house on Cedar Street, asked after her health. But invisible in the way that a person becomes when the world has decided they are complete and has stopped wondering what might happen to them next. She had come to the harvest giving to buy a quilt. Her own had gone threadbare over the winter, and she hadn't had time to make another. That was the entirety of her plan for the morning. She bought the quilt, a double wedding ring pattern in blues and creams, and was turning to leave when she saw the children. There were 6 of them. 5 had already been claimed or were in conversation with families. The 6th was a boy. He was sitting on the church steps a little apart from the others, not because anyone had put him there, but because he had moved there himself. He was perhaps 8 years old, though something about his face made it difficult to say with certainty. Small for his age, or the age she guessed him to be, with the particular thinness of a child who has not been eating enough for long enough that it has changed his proportions. Brown hair that someone had recently combed with more ambition than success, a patched jacket. Boots that were almost right for his feet. He was not watching the crowd. He was watching a brown sparrow that had landed near the church steps and was conducting some investigation of the ground with focused intensity. Nora stopped. She watched 2 families approach Mrs. Grover and glance toward the boy and speak to her in low voices, and then glance away. Not cruelly. They had their reasons, the same as anyone. He was older than people wanted. Boys at 8 were past the appealing stage and not yet at the useful stage, which left them in a particular no-man's land of consideration. The boy watched the sparrow without appearing to notice any of this. Mrs. Grover caught Nora's eye. She had the look of a woman who has learned to identify a person who is standing still for a reason. "He's a good boy," she said when she reached her, not as a sales pitch, as a statement of fact from someone who has limited time and says only what is necessary. "What's his name?" Nora said. "Jonas, Mrs. Grover said. "Jonas Pruitt, no relation to anyone in the county. Mother died in the spring. Father was gone before that. No other family we could locate. How old?" 8-9 in February. Nora looked at the boy named Jonas Pruitt, who had not looked up. The sparrow had apparently found what it was looking for and departed, but the boy was still watching the spot where it had been. "The fee," she said. $3, Mrs. Grover said. Nora opened her purse. She had $4 and some coins, which was the entirety of what she had brought for the quilt and incidentals. She paid the $3. She was not entirely certain what she was doing. She ran a bakery. She had a 3-room house. She had no husband and no experience with children, and no particular plan for what happened after the paperwork, which Mrs. Grover produced from her coat with the efficiency of someone who had learned to have it ready. While she signed, Jonas Pruitt looked up for the first time. He had gray eyes, which was not what she expected, and he looked at her with the careful attention of someone taking an accounting. "Are you the one?" he said. His voice was even, not hopeful, not afraid. The voice of someone who has learned to gather information before committing to a response. "I think so," Nora said. "Is that all right?" He appeared to consider this seriously. "Do you have animals?" he said. "No," she said. "I have a bakery." He thought about this. "Do you make pie?" "I make 6 kinds," she said. Something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile, not quite relief, but a rearrangement toward something slightly less guarded. He stood up and picked up a small canvas bag from beside the steps. It was very small, which told her everything about what he owned. He held it in one hand, and his other hand remained at his side, and he did not reach for hers, which she noted and respected. "All right," he said. They walked to where her horse and cart were tied at the far end of the churchyard. She put the quilt in the back of the cart, and Jonas stood beside the wheel and looked at the cart with the evaluating expression that appeared. She was beginning to understand when he was deciding something. Then he climbed up onto the seat without being asked. She climbed up beside him. They sat for a moment before she took the reins. "It's 3 miles," she said. "To town, to where I live." "All right," he said. They drove in the particular silence of people who have no pretenses established yet, and therefore no performance to maintain. After a mile, he said, "What do I call you?" It was, she thought, a very precise question. Not "what's your name," which he could have asked Mrs. Grover, but "what do I call you," which was the more important question, and which she hadn't been asked before and didn't immediately know how to answer. "Nora," she said. "That's my name. You can decide the rest later." He appeared to find this acceptable. Cedar Street in November was bare-limbed and quiet, the hardwoods stripped to their gray skeletons, the sky the color of pewter pressing down on the tops of the mountains in the distance. Her house was the white one with the green shutters and the sign in the window that said Vane's Baked Goods, fresh daily. She had painted the sign herself. The letters weren't entirely even, which bothered her sometimes, and other times she thought were part of the charm. Jonas looked at the sign for a long moment when she pulled up. He could read, she registered. That was something. Inside, the house smelled like it always did. Yeast and wood smoke and cinnamon, in proportions that shifted depending on what she'd been baking. She had learned years ago that people either loved that smell or didn't, and that their reaction to it told her something about them. Jonas stood in the doorway and breathed in, and something in his face went still in the way a face goes still when it encounters something it hasn't expected and doesn't yet have a name for. She showed him the house, the front room that was the bakery, with its long work table and the glass case she'd bought from a bankrupt hotel in Denver when she was 24, the kitchen. There's 2 rooms in the back. The smaller room was a storage room, she said. "I've cleared it out. There's a cot. I'll get you proper furniture when I can." He looked at the cot. It was made up with a quilt, not the new one she'd kept in storage, clean, pillow. He put his bag down on it with a care that suggested the bag contained things he considered worth protecting. "It's good," he said. That evening she made supper and they sat at the kitchen table, and she found that she was not certain how to talk to an 8-year-old, which was a gap in her experience she hadn't had reason to consider before. But Jonas, as it turned out, was not difficult to talk to. He asked questions with the directness of someone who has learned that indirectness costs time. He asked how many loaves she made in a day. He asked if she owned the building or paid rent. He asked if the horse was hers or hired. She answered all of these honestly because the questions deserved honesty, and because she had the sense that he would know the difference. "You ask a lot of questions," she said. "My mother said the same thing," he said. Then, with the factual steadiness of someone who has been carrying something long enough to have learned to carry it without dropping it, "She died in April. Of a cough that went bad. She had it all winter and it went bad in April." "I'm sorry," Nora said. "She was good," he said. She couldn't always find work, but she was good at it when she had it. She sewed. She was fast. He was quiet for a moment. She had small hands, quick hands. She could sew a seam you could barely see. Nora said nothing. There was nothing to add to that. After a moment, Jonas said, "What about you?" She told him the way you tell a child, not everything, but the honest shape of it. Born in Ohio, come west at 22 with her husband, a man named Cass, who had died of a fever in their second year in Colorado and left her with a house she couldn't afford and a future she hadn't planned. She had started the bakery because she could bake and because she needed to eat. She had kept the bakery because it turned out she was good at it, and because, and this was a thing she had not said out loud before, it turned out that feeding people was a thing that mattered to her, specifically in a way that not everything did. She had not planned to say that last part. She said it anyway. Jonas listened with the focused stillness he brought to things he considered important. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "How long ago did your husband die?" 7 years, she said. "And you've been here alone since then?" "Mostly," she said. He appeared to process this with the same systematic care he'd given to the question about the horse and the rent. "That's a long time," he said, not with pity, as an observation. "It is," she said. He ate the rest of his supper. She did the same. Outside, the November wind found the gaps in the window frames that she kept meaning to fix, and the stove ticked and settled, and it was, she thought, and then set the thought aside to examine later, a different silence than the one she usually ate supper in. The trouble came from the women on Cedar Street. Not all of them. 2 of them, specifically. Miriam Cleary, who ran the dry goods next door, and a woman named Bet Halverson, who had strong opinions about how a widow ought to conduct herself. They came together, as such women often do, on a Tuesday morning in early December while Jonas was at school, and they stood in the bakery with the particular posture of people delivering a message they have rehearsed. The gist was, it was irregular. A woman alone taking in a boy alone. People would talk. It wasn't proper. What did she know about raising a child? Had she thought about what it looked like? Nora let them finish. She had been baking since 4 that morning, and her patience for the performance was not unlimited. "He needed a home," she said. "I had one. That's the extent of the irregularity." "People will say," Miriam started. "People will say whatever they decide to say," Nora said. "They'll do it regardless. I've been a widow for 7 years in a small town. I know how it works." They left without buying anything, which she noted. She turned back to the bread. But she was not, if she was honest with herself, entirely unbothered. What bothered her was not what Miriam or Betta thought. What bothered her was the underlying question, the one they had dressed up in propriety, but which was real. What did she know about raising a child? What did she know about what Jonas needed? That evening she found Jonas at the kitchen table with a school book open and a piece of scratch paper beside it on which he was drawing something with the focused attention he gave to everything. She sat across from him. "How was school?" she said. "Fine," he said. Then, with the precision that was characteristic, "A boy in my class said something. What kind of something?" He looked at the scratch paper. He had drawn a very accurate sparrow, she noted. "He said I was a charity case, that you only took me because no one else would have me." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Does that bother you?" she said. Jonas considered this in the genuine way he considered things, not performing deliberation, but actually doing it. "It used to," he said, "when I was at the home. Boys said things like that all the time there." He smoothed the scratch paper. "But I thought about it. He's saying something about what he can see." "He can't see very much." Nora looked at him across the table. 8 years old, with the gray eyes and the quick mind and the small canvas bag that contained everything he owned, drawing sparrows on scratch paper in a bakery kitchen in Colorado. "That's right," she said. "He can't." She paused. "Did you say anything back to him?" "No," Jonas said. "It would have made it important. Right now, it's just something a boy said." She looked at him for a long moment. She had the particular sense of encountering something you had not known you were looking for and recognizing it upon arrival. "That's a very clear way to think about it," she said. "My mother taught me," he said. He said it simply, the way he said most things, with no editorializing. Then he went back to the sparrow. She did not go to the school and speak to anyone. She thought about it for 2 days and then thought, he handled it. He doesn't need you to undo his handling of it. So she didn't. But she made a point, the next morning, of leaving one of the smaller apple tarts on the kitchen table before he left for school. With no comment, he ate it and said nothing, which was, she had come to understand, his version of thank you. Winter settled into Harlan's Bluff with the particular severity of a Colorado mountain winter, which is the kind that doesn't negotiate. The bakery was busy through December because people who are cold want bread and want it often. Nora expanded her hours, and Jonas, who had no school on Saturdays, came to the bakery with her in the mornings and watched the work with the systematic attention he brought to things he found interesting, which, she was discovering, was most things. He had questions about yeast, which she answered. He had questions about why some loaves rose more than others, which she explained in terms she thought an 8-year-old could follow, and then found she had misjudged, because he asked follow-up questions that indicated he had followed everything and wanted more. She adjusted. By January, he could make a competent biscuit without being told the steps. She discovered this on a Sunday morning when she came into the kitchen and found him at the work table with flour on his sleeves and a pan of 12 biscuits, slightly irregular but structurally sound, resting on the stovetop. "I watched how you do it," he said, not proudly. As an explanation, "They look good," she said. "The bottoms are a little dark," he said. I lost track of the time. She cut one open. The inside was light and properly done. The bottom was slightly dark. "The bottoms are fine," she said. "A little color is not a problem." He ate 2 of them with the careful appreciation of someone evaluating their own work honestly. Then he said, "Can I learn to make the bread?" "The real bread." "Yes," she said. "We'll start next Sunday." These were small things. But Nora had run a bakery long enough to understand that small things, properly attended to, were what most things were built from. She had begun, without planning it, looking for him in the mornings. Not with anxiety. He was not a child who gave her cause for anxiety, being where he said he would be, and doing what he said he would do with a consistency that was frankly more reliable than most adults she knew. But the way you look for something that has become part of the shape of your day. The particular gray eyes over the rim of a coffee cup that was too large for him, which he drank from anyway. The way he read with his finger tracing the line, slowly, as if he were following a trail. The drawings, which had expanded from sparrows to horses to, she had found one, left on her work table, a very accurate rendering of the bakery's glass case, with each shelf and its contents rendered in detail she hadn't known he'd been observing. He, in turn, had begun saving her the first biscuit of whatever batch he made, wrapped in a cloth, placed on the work table where she would find it. He never said anything about this. She never said anything about it either. There are arrangements that work better without being named. The difficulty with the arrangement was Nora herself, which is the part that she examined in the evenings when Jonas was asleep and she was at the kitchen table with her account books, adding numbers that were close but not comfortable. She had taken him in for the right reasons, she thought, or she had taken him in for reasons she hadn't fully understood at the time but which had turned out to be right ones, which was not necessarily the same thing, but was close enough. But what she had not fully considered, in the moment of paying the $3, was that a child was not a fixed thing. He was 8 now, he would be 9 in February, and then he would be 10, and then 12, and then something would be required of her that was different from what was required now, and she was not entirely certain she had what it took. She did not say this to anyone, because she had no one to say it to, or had not had until now. The not having was something she had gotten used to. The having, which she was tentatively constructing, was something she didn't quite trust yet. It was a February evening, Jonas's birthday, that she found herself saying something she hadn't planned. She had made a cake, a proper one, with 2 layers and icing, which was not something she made for general sale, but which she made for occasions. And Jonas had eaten 2 pieces with the careful appreciation he brought to food he found particularly well done. And they were sitting at the table, the cake between them and the stove burning down to coals. "Jonas," she said. He looked up. He had the expression he wore when something required his full attention, still and focused and thorough. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right," he said. He set down his fork. When things were important, he gave them full attention. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I've run a bakery for 7 years. I've been alone for 7 years. I know how to do those things. I don't know how to do this." He was quiet, listening. "But I've been thinking," she said, "that I'd like to do it properly, if you wanted that. The county has a process for formal guardianship. It would make it official. You'd be, legally, properly, mine to look after, and I would be, legally, properly responsible for you." She looked at him. "If you wanted that." Jonas looked at the table. He did this when he was processing information, looked at a fixed point and thought it through with the systematic care he gave to yeast and sparrows and bread. "Why?" he said, not challenging. The direct question of someone who wants the real answer. She thought about it. "Because you're the most honest person I've spent time with in a long time," she said, "and because I paid $3 on a Saturday in October without knowing quite why, and I've been thinking about it ever since, and what I think it was the right thing, and I think I'd like to keep doing the right thing." She paused. "And because I have a house and a bakery and a life that's been quiet for 7 years, and it's a better life since February of last year than it was before it, since you came." Jonas was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up. "The biscuits," he said. "Can I keep making them?" She almost laughed. She did not quite laugh. "Yes," she said, "you can keep making them." "Then I'd want that," he said. The county in Harlan's Bluff processed the guardianship with the pragmatic efficiency of a mountain territory that had no patience for unnecessary steps. A judge, a clerk, 2 signatures, and a filing fee. It was done on a Tuesday. Nora bought Jonas a new pair of boots to mark the occasion. Properly fitted this time, measured by the cobbler on Market Street, which took longer than the legal proceeding. Jonas wore them out of the shop and looked down at his feet with the expression he wore when assessing a thing honestly. "They're good boots," he said. "They are," she said. He wore them to school the next day and said nothing about where they'd come from, which she understood. Some things did not require announcing. The years that followed were the kind that are easy to describe in summary and difficult to convey in their actual texture, because their actual texture was made of small things that accumulated into something large without any single moment you could point to as the turning. Jonas grew. He grew the way children do when they are finally eating enough, steadily, and then in a rush that seemed to happen between one season and the next. By the time he was 12, he was nearly as tall as Nora. By 13, he was taller. He retained through all of this the gray eyes and the quality of stillness and the systematic way of approaching things he didn't understand yet. He became, over time, useful in the bakery in ways that Nora had not anticipated, and that changed the business. He had a head for quantities that she did not, could calculate in his head how much flour she needed for a given week, how much the output would cost to produce and what the margin was, whether it made sense to expand into a given product or whether the time cost was not worth it. She had been running on instinct for 7 years. He gave her numbers to put to the instinct, which turned out to be the combination that worked. He read every book she could find him. He sent away for more. He developed a particular interest in engineering and in the mechanics of things, which expressed itself in a running project of improving the bakery's oven, which he approached with iterations, adjusting the damper, testing the draw, sketching modifications in his notebook, and still the heat distribution was noticeably better, and Nora's baking times became more predictable. "Where did you learn to do this?" she asked him, when he was 14, and had just solved a problem with the flu that she had been working around for 3 years. "Books," he said, and looking at it. "Your mother taught you to look at things," she said. She said it without thinking, which was, she realized, the right way to have said it. His mother was not a subject they avoided. She was a subject they visited, from time to time, with honesty. Jonas was quiet for a moment, the way he went quiet when he was looking at something from all angles. "She taught me the looking," he said. "You taught me the looking leads somewhere." Nora said nothing to that. After a moment, she went back to her bread. There is always trouble, in the middle section of any life, came when Jonas was 15. A man from Denver, a businessman developing a commercial bakery operation in the territory, came to Harlan's Bluff for a week of meetings and ate Nora's bread every morning, and on Thursday came to the bakery to speak with her about a proposition. He wanted to buy the operation, not the building, the recipes, the name, the methods, a 2-year consulting arrangement. The number he named was significant, more than she had saved in 7 years, enough to be a different kind of free. She thanked him and said she would think about it, which was honest. She did think about it for 3 days, which was 2 days longer than she usually needed to think about anything. Then she found Jonas in the workshop space he'd claimed at the back of the house for his engineering projects, bent over a piece of pipe with calipers and a notebook, and she sat on the workbench beside him and told him about the offer. He listened. He asked 2 clarifying questions about the terms. Then he said, "What do you want to do? Not what should we do? Not what does it mean for me? What do you want to do?" "I want to keep the bakery," she said. "I built it. I know what's in it." He nodded once. "Then that's what makes sense," he said. "The money." She started. "Is not the thing," he said. "You already have what the money would buy. You have the work you know how to do. That's not nothing." He looked at her. "That's not nothing at all." She looked at him, 15 years old, with the gray eyes and the calipers and the notebook, sitting in a workshop that had been a storage room before he needed it, in a house that had been quiet for 7 years before he filled it. "You sound like a grown man," she said. "I've been listening to one thing for a long time," he said. "What you do when what you have is enough. I've been listening to you figure that out." She declined the Denver businessman's offer on Friday. He was disappointed and gracious about it, which she respected. She did not tell Jonas she'd declined for a week. When she told him, he said, "Good, that was all. Good," and went back to the pipe. Jonas Pruitt left Harlan's Bluff at 19 to study engineering in Denver at a college that had, upon reviewing his application and the supporting letter from the judge who had processed his guardianship papers and who had been eating Nora's bread for 11 years, offered him a partial scholarship that he supplemented with bakery work at a shop 2 blocks from campus. He wrote every 2 weeks, letters that were characteristically precise. What he was learning, what problems he was working on, what made sense and what didn't yet. She wrote back. This was not something she had done much of in her life. Before Jonas, she discovered she was a better correspondent than she'd realized because she had things to say. She had been saying them for 11 years across a kitchen table in a house on Cedar Street in a mountain town in Colorado, and the practice had sharpened something. On the evening of his 21st birthday, she received a letter that was longer than usual. It ended with a question. "Are you glad you stopped?" At the harvest giving. "Are you glad you stopped when you saw me?" She read it twice. Then she sat at the kitchen table, the same one, still, she had bought when she was 24 and had never replaced because it was a good table, and she wrote back. Every day she wrote, every single day. She sealed the letter and set it on the work table for the morning post. Then she went to bed and lay in the quiet house on Cedar Street and thought about $3. The $3 in her purse on an October Saturday in Harlan's Bluff, spent on a boy with gray eyes watching a sparrow on a church step. She had gone to buy a quilt. She had come home with something she had not known to look for and had not known she was missing, and which had turned out to be, there was no smaller word for it, the best $3 she had ever spent. Not a worker, not a charity case. A son of the particular and irreplaceable kind that comes not from blood but from showing up, day after day at the same table and choosing it.